Good morning. My name is Jay Rosenthal. I'm the Managing Director of Business of Cannabis. Welcome back to Cannabis Daily for Tuesday, January 18th. If you like what you see, you can check out the rest of our channel at businessofcannabis.com or on this channel right here on YouTube, Business of Cannabis on YouTube. So please subscribe. For those new to Business of Cannabis, since 2017, we've highlighted the companies, brands, people, and trends driving the cannabis industry. And that's what we look to do here every day. Following the rundown of the key stories we're following, we'll get to our BofC Live segment where we'll be joined by Brandon Kurtzman today. He's a partner of Vicente Sederberg. He'll be talking about all things legalization in New York. We'd love to hear from you in the comments, and always feel free to visit us at businessofcannabis.com, as well as through all of our social channels, Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. Before we get going, we encourage you to check out two upcoming events. First, our retail series in January, which will be online. It's presented by Leafly and Vitrina Group. We'll be looking at inventory planning for 2022 for cannabis retailers. And our Business of Cannabis Miami event about cannabis retail tech, design, and data. All the information is in the description below. For today's stories: Battle of the Brands in the US, Indoor Green Isn't So Green, Bruce is back, CBD flower in France again, and how many cannabis stores are there in Canada? We will take a look. For our first story, after a lackluster year in federal cannabis legalization in the US, Amplify Seymour Cannabis ETF manager Tim Seymour told CNBC that 2022 will be all about building brand awareness in the cannabis industry. Tilray's Irwin Simon echoed the sentiment, saying, "What do you do in the U.S. while you wait for legalization? You build out brands and categories with adjacency to the cannabis industry, like the spirits business, like the beer business, like the food and hemp business." That, according to Irwin Simon. For our second story, Canopy Growth's new Environmental, Social, and Governance Report, ESG, reveals that the company's 2020 emissions were, quote, equivalent to burning more than 65 million pounds of coal. That is in Mother Jones. Recent reports from Vancouver's Rubicon Organics and Toronto's Chiron Life Science reflect a similarly challenging environmental footprint. With investors increasingly looking for higher ESG ratings and sustainability, the pressure's on for cannabis companies to reduce their carbon footprint. Quote, "As we work towards creating a sustainable long-term profitability, we are cognizant of the link between business models that create shared value for a wider stakeholder group being more likely to succeed over time versus those that operate in the singular pursuit of profit." That, according to Canopy's Chief Advocacy Officer, Hilary Black. For our third story, and speaking of Canopy, former Canopy Growth CEO Bruce Linton defended his actions as CEO of now defunct Ruckify, which is a peer-to-peer rental marketplace designed to allow people to monetize their assets. Linton chimed in on LinkedIn, and according to him, they had 6 months of cash left when he took over. Right before he took over, they generated $7,000 in rental income. That's not a typo, $7,000. Gross revenue was slightly higher, but losses were almost $8 million. And accumulated deficit was more than $14 million. He said, "I could not save Ruckify. I took over as CEO in January 2021. It had 6 months of cash remaining. I went so far as self-funding Ruckify until the end of 2021, while restructuring operations and attempting to merge with a viable entity. Still failed." He did have one lesson for all of us: be careful about starting a business with neighbors or friends. For our fourth story, Cannabis Benchmarks, which is our partner on a weekly basis, reviewed cannabis retail locations in Canada and gave us a store count. The number of stores continue to climb across Canada, making the legal cannabis system more accessible to consumers, according to Cannabis Benchmarks, or in some cases, increasing competition amongst retailers in more saturated local markets. The latest count shows the number of stores open for business reached 2,967 as of the end of December 2021. That number is up 111% compared to December 2022. Cannabis Benchmarks expects the trend to continue throughout this year, but potentially at a slower rate. You can read the full report on businessofcannabis.com. And on Tuesday, we always have updates from Cannabis Benchmarks. Our final story, the French hemp and CBD industry will find out if the government ban on CBD flower sales will be overturned by the courts this week. This, according to Business Can. The Hemp Professional Syndicate and the Union of CBD Professionals, UPCBD, have both formally requested to dismiss the ban that went into effect on the 31st, arguing that, quote, "it's an emergency situation with 70% of sales coming from dried flower." Those are the stories we're watching today. Join 10,000 others and catch all of these stories and more in your inbox every day at 7 a.m. with our Cannabis Daily newsletter. Coming up on our BofC Live podcast conversation, we connect with Brandon Kurtzman. He's a partner of Vicente Sederberg, a national cannabis law firm in the U.S. We wanted to connect with Kurtzman about the latest regulatory cannabis news in New York, including a recent announcement about a $200 million social equity fund in that state. This is Brandon Kurtzman from Vicente Sederberg. Brandon, thanks for being here.
Good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Not a day goes by when New York cannabis legalization, timeline, social equity, there's a lot going on in New York. I want to talk to you about some of these things that have crossed everybody's screen. Are you ready for that?
Yeah, let's talk about it.
Good. The first thing is it seems that the end of December, a deadline passed for cities, municipalities, counties to opt in or opt out of retail and in and out of lounges. Have I screwed that up too tremendously?
No, spot on. So the December 31st was the deadline for municipalities to opt out of the social consumption and the retail licenses. So now we have a picture of sort of the municipalities that have opted out and who's opted in. And what we're going to now be monitoring is the local zoning that is passed to sort of regulate where these not only these uses but all the other licensees can be, and that's going to really sort of shape this next phase of New York licensing, which is obviously a big important part of all cannabis licensing. It's property and where you're gonna be located. So it's a big development. So
the real estate people are well, they're not waiting for anything, but they're anxiously awaiting what cities and counties will do related to zoning.
Right. Typically you don't want to spend a ton of money locking down a property that is, when you don't know what the zoning is going to be later, to only figure out that that property is not going to work for what you want to do there. So you want to have the zoning in place, and then once you know where the properties are going to be located or where you can locate these licenses or licensed entities, licensed marijuana businesses, then you can enter into a lease or a purchase and sale agreement or whatever it may be to know where you're going to be located. Leases with no prospect of cannabis retail are very expensive investments. We've learned that in other places for sure. One of the more interesting, or the most interesting aspect of what's happening in New York is the emphasis on social equity. And the number of licenses that are going to go to social equity applicants is very compelling. I want to talk about that, but also that New York appears to be backing that up with how to get social equity applicants up and running too. And they announced, you're going to tell me the right number, but like $200 million fund. Talk to me about what's happening aside from the licensing component, but also helping those businesses get up and thrive. Yeah, and again, you hit the nail on the head with this this notion that New York has really made a strong commitment to social equity, and the state's goal is for 50% of all licenses to go to social equity applicants, and so you have a large list of groups that fit into those categories. These are minority-owned businesses. These are businesses or individuals that have been disproportionately impacted by the war on drugs. You have distressed farmers, disabled veterans. There's even legislation pending right now to expand social equity to include transgender, non-binary, gay, lesbian, and bisexual individuals as well. So there's this whole group of individuals and entities or qualifications that will be able to participate in social equity. Now, the numbers are great and the goals are great, but how do you back these up? And one of the biggest complaints or obstacles that we see with social equity programs in many states is there isn't adequate funding or sources of funding to support social equity applicants. And where New York seems to be differing from other states is that they seem to be the most thoughtful or extremely thoughtful about one, providing commitments with funds. Governor Hochul recently came out and said there's going to be $200 million public-private fund to support social equity businesses. But then you also have sort of a very strategic roster of individuals who are involved with the CCB and the OCM, who it seems like have the experience to really see this through. And I could expand on that if you want me to.
I want you to. Yeah.
Okay, so I think that so I really see revenue or the funds available to support social equity coming from three places. And traditionally, in many other states, you see like the taxes generated from the sale of cannabis will be reinvested to social equity programs, or the fees that the licensees use to apply for the licenses and to do their annual registrations will be used to support social equity. The issue with using taxes and fees for social equity is that it doesn't get the funds to social equity at the outset. And that's really when social equity businesses need them the most. Because if you're waiting for everybody else to get operational and start selling before money starts rolling in, then it further disadvantages the individuals who don't have access and can't get open as soon as everybody else. Now, New York is doing a great job to allocate the taxes and the fees to social equity causes, and we can kind of put that aside for a second and focus more on, how do you get funds to social equity applicants earlier on? And I think that is where this $200 million fund comes in. And again, we don't have a lot of details yet about this fund and how it's going to, where this money is going to come from and who's going to have access to it. But what I look to CCB Commissioner Reuben McDaniel III, who currently serves as the CEO and president of the Dormitory Authority, or the Dormitory of State of New York, the Dormitory of State of New York. And what the Dormitory Authority of the State of New York is, it's a public benefit corporation that was established in like 1944 with the goal of providing or issuing bonds to support nonprofit projects for education, government, public health. And I think that there's few individuals in New York that are better suited than Commissioner McDaniel to use the infrastructure or the lessons or the systems that Daphne has been using for decades now, and incorporating this to issue bonds and find ways to raise money for social equity applicants. So it's no mistake that Governor Hochul appointed Reuben McDaniel to the commission, because he knows exactly how to raise funds for businesses that need funding. And Daphne already does a ton of work for diverse-owned businesses, women-owned businesses. So this isn't new, and I don't think that there's any state that has been this thoughtful with these type of appointments. Tremaine Wright, who's the chairwoman of the CCB, she's currently serves as the statewide Office of Financial Inclusion, which is has a similar mission in terms of finding funding for underprivileged individuals and organizations. So they've created this really dream team of individuals with experience to really focus and provide solutions for social equity.
It's so thoughtful. And at our event in New York and back in September, there's lots of information out there about how states have done it that didn't work, but also not taking lessons from that, but like what does work and how can we replicate that? And New York, in some cases, is charting its own path, right? They've taken all the information available to them from Colorado on forward and said, we see what works, we see what doesn't, and how can we make it uniquely New York, but also make it actually implementable across the board. I think this fund is a really good example of that, but also the way they're going to be doing licensing is quite thoughtful, which lends itself to a sort of maybe the last question is, you add cannabis plus thoughtful plus elections plus social, like everything else that's going on, it doesn't lend itself to quick or fast generally when you add up all those things. Give us an idea of sort of what a timeline or time frame might be when we might be able to go into adult use, I don't know, dispensary in Buffalo from Toronto and like get cannabis. Is that like, can we even predict when that might be? And if we can't predict when it may be, like, give us some of the steps along the timeline.
Yeah, and we talked earlier about municipalities opting in, which is this deadline that was state imposed deadline to essentially move the process along. The state knows that you need to have locations in order to have these businesses. All indications based on what we're hearing from Chairwoman Wright and from other commissioners and from the governor is that it's going to be early 2023 for when these licensed businesses will be open to the public. The steps that need to occur between now and then are the big one. The next thing that we're going to really look to see is regulations. So they have indicated that regulations, a draft of regulations, are going to come out sometime in Q1 of this year. Which will have a draft of regulations, which will be followed by a 2-month public comment period. Then the regulations will be promulgated in effect, and then there'll be the rollout of the licenses, and the state will start to accept licenses in some capacity, and then there's sort of the review period for the licenses. Which it's hard to say, how long that's going to take and how long it's going to take for them to roll out the licensing process. But the idea is that from the time that regulations pass to sometime in early 2023, everything else that needs to happen in terms of creating the licensing process, accepting licenses, reviewing licenses, issuing licenses will occur to allow for the businesses to open in early 2023. And I think that a large part of that is making sure that the CCB and the OCM are taking the steps necessary to ensure that the social equity considerations are properly in place, so that you're not giving advantages to the same groups that have always had the advantages, the ones that have easier access to the funding. And if they do it properly, I can see how it's going to take a year and a year is a quick timeline for the task at hand here. And if they're able to do it right, which I think that they have the talent and seems like the plan to do, it's really going to be a great program in New York, which I think is going to be worth the wait.
Yeah, it would be a great model, right? I mean, there are still lots of big states to follow, including some neighboring New York, right? Pennsylvania and Ohio. We're looking even further, like in Minnesota. Like there's just lots of road ahead, and every state that gets it closer to right is great to my mind. And it's great to connect with you sort of about the latest what's happening in New York, because again, it's happening fast and furious on some levels, even though the timeline seems to be, a year out till or a year or more, till we actually start to see, stores opening and sort of a real robust plan. But the idea that you just laid out does make good sense and makes me less anxious, but also a good view of sort of what has happened over the past month and what is likely to happen over the next several. So Brandon, I always appreciate chatting with you. We look forward to connecting with you down the road, and keep up the good work.
Yeah, you too, Jay. Talk soon.
That was episode 12 of Cannabis Daily. Thank you for joining us this morning on YouTube. Please subscribe, and we will see you here tomorrow.